Chapter 55, Fear of Loss. The ocean was too loud. I stood in the kitchen of our new house, my fingers trembling as I held a glass of water. Outside, the Atlantic was a churning mass of dark gray, the waves slamming against the shore with a violence that seemed to echo the sudden, sharp panic in my chest. It had been 3 days since the future talk. 3 days of bliss so absolute it felt like a hallucination. We had walked the beach, we had planned the nursery, we had laughed until our lungs ached. But this morning, the silence of the house had been broken by the rhythmic, urgent beep of a medical monitor. My father had suffered a minor respiratory spike. The doctor said it was expected, a side effect of the aggressive neural mapping, but to me, it felt like the first crack in the glass. It was a reminder that for all the billions of dollars and scientific breakthroughs, life was still a fragile, fleeting thing. I felt a pair of strong arms wrap around my waist, pulling me back against a broad, warm chest. Alexander. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the tension in him, a vibrating frequency of alarm that mirrored my own. "He's stable, Maya," Alexander whispered, his breath warm against my neck. "The medical team is with him. It's just a fluctuation." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. I turned in his arms, burying my face in the crook of his shoulder. "But I realized something this morning. I'm terrified, Alexander." "Of what?" "Of how much I have to lose now. A month ago, I was fighting for survival. I had nothing but a debt and a dream. If I failed, it was just another Tuesday. But now..." I pulled back, looking into his stormy gray eyes. "I have you. I have my father. I have this house. I have a life I actually want to live. If the world takes it away now, I won't survive it." Alexander's grip on my waist tightened, not with the possessiveness of the steward, but with the desperation of a man who finally understood the stakes. "I won't let the world touch you," he growled. "I've spent my life managing risks, Maya. I can manage this." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the ghost of the old Alexander. The one who thought he could buy safety. The one who thought control was a shield against grief. The fear of loss was a poison, and it was starting to seep back into our sanctuary. Alexander POV. I watched Maya return to her father's room, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for a blow. The moment she was out of sight, I walked into my study and slammed the door. My hands were shaking, not with fatigue, but with a raw, unadulterated terror I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old, watching my father's coffin being lowered into the ground. I had everything. The woman, the peace, the truth. And because I had everything, I was more vulnerable than I had ever been. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over Marcus's contact. The old Alexander, the steward, was screaming at me. "Call the private security firm. Reinstall the biometric locks. Build a secondary medical wing with an independent power grid. Buy the closest hospital. Secure the perimeter. Lock her in." I started to type the command. "Marcus, I need a Tier 1 lockdown on the Hamptons site. No one enters or leaves without." I stopped. I looked at the gold band on my finger. If I built those walls, I wasn't protecting her. I was killing the woman she had become. I was returning to the locked-in era because I was too afraid to live in the claim. I was trying to negotiate with fate, and fate didn't take Blackwood currency. I deleted the text. But the fear didn't go away. It felt like a cold stone in my stomach. I walked to the window, watching the waves. I had spent 34 years being the man who owned the room because I was afraid of what happened when the room was empty. Now, the room was full, and the thought of the silence returning was enough to make me want to burn the world down just to keep the lights on. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Alexander. Maya walked in. She had changed into a silk slip dress, the champagne one she had worn in the penthouse. She looked fragile, beautiful, and utterly exhausted. "The doctors are gone," she said. "He's sleeping. His vitals are back to baseline." "Good," I said, my voice sounding strained. She walked over to me, her eyes searching mine. She saw the phone in my hand. She saw the tension in my jaw. She knew. "You were going to do it, weren't you?" She whispered. "You were going to call Marcus and bring the walls back." "I was trying to keep you safe," I rasped. "No, Alexander, you were trying to keep yourself from feeling. You think if you can control the environment, you can control the loss, but you can't." She reached out and took the phone from my hand, setting it on the desk. "You told me we were on equal ground. That means you have to feel the fear with me, not try to manage it for me." I let out a long, ragged breath and pulled her into my arms. I held her so tightly it was almost painful, my face buried in her hair. "I can't lose you, Maya," I choked out. "I finally found you. I can't go back to the silence." "Then don't," she said, pulling back to look at me. Her eyes were dark with a sudden, sharp desire, a need to reclaim the present moment from the ghosts of the future. "Don't look at the horizon, Alexander. Look at me, right now, in this room." Maya POV. The fear was a fire, but the passion was the only thing that could burn it out. I reached for the buttons of Alexander's shirt, my movements frantic and desperate. I didn't want the technical consultant. I didn't want the partner. I wanted the man whose hunger matched my own, the one who could make the rest of the world vanish with a single touch. He met my urgency with a ferocity that took my breath away. He backed me against the desk, his hands finding my hips, pulling me flush against the hard, demanding line of his body. "Maya," he groaned against my lips. "No more talk," I whispered. "Just this, just us." He lifted me onto the desk, the vigil of justice, notebook skittering across the wood and falling to the floor. Neither of us cared. The past was a memory, the future was a threat, but the present was a white-hot frequency that demanded our total surrender. In the moonlight, surrounded by the sketches of a life we were still afraid to build, we tore at each other's defenses. It wasn't the slow, reverent intimacy of our wedding night. This was a battle for the soul of our relationship. It was a reclamation of the claim. Alexander touched me as if he were trying to memorize my skin through his fingertips. He kissed me with a desperation that tasted of the sea and the end of the world. Every touch was an acknowledgement of how much we had to lose, and every groan was a vow to keep it. When he finally moved inside me, I felt a surge of emotion so intense it was almost a physical pain. It was a merging of souls, a crossing of the final line where the fear of loss was replaced by the reality of possession. Not the possession of a master, but the possession of a heart that had finally found its home. We moved together in the rhythm of the storm outside, a slow, agonizingly beautiful dance of survival. In the dark of the Hamptons night, we finally conquered the fear of loss by realizing that even if the world took everything else, they could never take the way we felt in this moment. "You're mine," Alexander gasped, his fingers digging into my shoulders. "Forever." "And you're mine," I replied, my voice a ragged breath. "No matter what happens." As we reached the peak together, the fallout finally settled. The room was full. The world was quiet. And for the first time in our lives, we weren't afraid of the silence. Alexander POV 3:00 a.m. I stayed awake long after Maya fell asleep. The rain had stopped, leaving the world feeling scrubbed and raw. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the moonlight dance across Maya's face. She looked so peaceful, the fear of the morning finally erased by the exhaustion of our love. I looked at the gold band on my finger. The fear of loss hadn't vanished. I don't think it ever would. To love someone as much as I loved Maya was to live with a permanent, pulsing ache of vulnerability. But I realized now that the ache was a gift. It was the proof that I was finally alive. I reached down and picked up the Vigil of Justice notebook from the floor. I opened it to the very last page, under my entry for the future talk. I picked up a pen and wrote a new line: the fear of loss, the price of a full room, and I'm willing to pay it every single day. I put the notebook back on the nightstand and lay down beside my wife. I pulled her into my heat, my arm draped across her waist. The locked-in era was a memory. The claim was our reality. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the dunes, I realized the final truth of our journey. We didn't need to be safe. We just needed to be together. Maya POV morning. I woke up to the sound of a laugh, not Alexander's. A deeper, more raspy sound that I hadn't heard in years. I sat up, my heart thudding. Alexander was already out of bed. I pulled on his shirt and ran toward my father's room. Alexander was there, sitting on the edge of the bed. My father was sitting up, a tray of breakfast in front of him. They were looking at a tablet together, and my father was laughing. "Maya," my father said, his voice clear and strong. "Look at this. Alexander says he wants to build a nursery with biometric diapers." I froze in the doorway, a sob of relief and joy breaking through my chest. Alexander looked up at me, a real, genuine smile lighting up his face. The fear from yesterday was gone, replaced by a radiant, unshielded peace. "I was just explaining the security protocols to the chief scientific advisor," Alexander teased. I walked over and threw my arms around both of them. The fear of loss was still there, a tiny shadow in the corner of my mind, but it was being drowned out by the brilliant, golden light of the present. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I whispered. "We're better than okay, Maya," Alexander said, pulling me into a kiss. "We're the ones who own the room." We spent the morning in the garden, the three of us. We didn't talk about the SEC or the media. We talked about the flowers. We talked about the house. We talked about the fact that we were finally, truly free. The claim was complete. Act IV was almost finished. And as the sun rose over the Atlantic, casting a long, golden path across the water, I realized that the story of the billionaire and the scientist was no longer about the fire. It was about the life that grew from the ash. Alexander POV. I sat on the deck, watching Maya and her father walk along the shoreline. The world was quiet. The board was silent. The enemies were at bay. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Vigil of Justice notebook. I opened it to the very last page. Under the words "the fear of loss, the price of a full room," I wrote one final line for the claim. The result, everything. I looked at the house, at the woman, and at the horizon. I was Alexander Blackwood. I had lost an empire, a name, and a reputation. And I had never been more successful in my life. Maya POV, end of chapter 55. The sun began to set over the dunes, casting a long, orange glow over our house. I looked at the ring on my finger. It was just a band of gold, but it was the strongest thing I'd ever seen. I looked at Alexander, and I saw my husband, my partner, and my equal. We were no longer locked in. We were just us, and the world was ours to explore, together. Next chapter, chapter 56, The Last Obstacle.